Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for October the 13th. Today we are reading together in First Chronicles chapters 10 and 11. We have made it past the genealogical section of Chronicles, but it was for a purpose, again, to remind us of what we talked about in those first few readings through First Chronicles 1 through 9. That genealogy, or those genealogies, were good and beneficial for those who were receiving this writing, seemingly post-exilic, post the captivity of Israel, because they need to be reminded of some things. One, they need to be reminded who they were as the covenant people of God, and to be reminded of their legitimate lineage in Israel. They also need to be reminded of where they came from, the land and the portions of land that they possessed, and they need to be reminded that God was their God, and there needed to be a return to worship, and they needed to keep in mind why it was that they had been sent into, why they've been sent into captivity to begin with, because of sin. Now the chronicler is going to focus on the story of Israel, and he's going to focus in these two chapters we're going to look at today on Saul and David, and really God beginning his rule, not God beginning his rule, but God changing the way he was ruling his people, and now doing it through earthly kings. We see just a very small snapshot of Saul's reign, and then the text begins the transfer of the kingdom from Saul to David, and we'll see the expansion of David's rule over chapters 11 and 12. So some today, and then tomorrow as well. So let me get the text of First Chronicles 10 up on the screen, and we'll read through chapter 11 today as well. We do have some more names today, so don't worry, we haven't gotten past that quite yet. But these are going to be the names of the best soldiers of David's mighty men who are mentioned within the text of First Chronicles chapter 11. So let's read here, beginning though in First Chronicles chapter 10, verse number 1. First Chronicles chapter 10, verse number 1 tells us that the Philistines fought against Israel, and Israel's men fled from them. Many were killed on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons and killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. When the battle intensified against Saul, the archer spotted him and severely wounded him. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through with it, or these uncircumcised men will come and torture me." But his armor bearer would not do it because he was terrified. Then Saul took his sword and fell on it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his own sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died. His whole house died together. When all the men of Israel in the valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. So the Philistines came and settled in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his sons dead on Mount Gilboa. They stripped Saul, cut off his head, and took his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the good news to their idols and the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of their gods and hung his skull in the temple of Dagon. When all of Jabesh Gilead heard of everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all the brave men set out and retrieved the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons and brought them to Jabesh. They buried their bones under the oak in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. Saul died for his unfaithfulness to Yahweh, because he did not keep Yahweh's word. He even consulted a medium for guidance, but he did not inquire of Yahweh. So Yahweh put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. All Israel, chapter 11 of First Chronicles, all Israel came together to David at Hebron and said, "Here we are, your own flesh and blood. Even previously, when Saul was king, you were leading Israel out to battle and bringing us back. Yahweh your God also said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will be ruler over my people Israel." So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron. David made a covenant with them at Hebron in Yahweh's presence, and they anointed David king over Israel in keeping with Yahweh's word through Samuel. Verse number 4 of 1 Chronicles 11, David and all Israel marched to Jerusalem, that is Jebus, and the Jebusites who inhabited the land were there. The inhabitants of Jebus said to David, "You will never get in here." Yet David did capture the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. David said, "Whoever is the first to kill a Jebusite will become chief commander." Joab, son of Zeruiah, went up first, and he became the chief. Then David took up residence in the stronghold. Therefore, it was called the city of David. He built up the city all the way around, from the supporting terraces to the surrounding parts, and Joab restored the rest of the city. David steadily grew more powerful, and the Yahweh of armies was with him. The following were the chiefs of David's warriors, who, together with all Israel, strongly supported him in his reign to make him king according to Yahweh's word about Israel. This is the list of David's warriors. Jashobeam, son of Machmoni, the chief of the 30, was chief of the 30. He wielded his spear against 300 and killed them at one time. After him, Eleazar, son of Dodo, the Ahohite, was one of the 3 warriors. He was with David at Pasdamim when the Philistines had gathered there for battle. There was a portion of the field full of barley, where the troops had fled from the Philistines. But Eleazar and David took their stand in the middle of the field and defended it. They killed the Philistines, and Yahweh gave them a great victory. 3 of the 30 chief men went down to David, to the rock at the cave of Adullam, while the Philistine army was encamped at was encamped in Rephaim Valley. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and a Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David was extremely thirsty and said, "Oh, if only someone would bring me water to drink from the well at the city gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 broke through the Philistine camp and drew water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. They brought it back to David, but he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to Yahweh. David said, "I would never do such a thing in the presence of my God. How can I drink the blood of these men who risked their lives?" For they brought it at the risk of their lives, so he would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 warriors. Abishai, Joab's brother, was leader of the 3. He raised his spear against 300 men and killed them, gaining a reputation among the 3. He was more honored than the 3 and became their commander, even though he did not become one of the 3. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, was the son of a brave man from Kabzeel, a man of many exploits. Benaiah killed 2 sons of Ariel of Moab, and he went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. He also killed an Egyptian who was 7.5 feet tall. Even though the Egyptian had a spear in his hand like a weaver's beam, Benaiah went down to him with a staff, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and then killed him with his own spear. These were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, who had a reputation among the 3 warriors. He was the most honored of the 30, but he did not become one of the 3. David put him in charge of his bodyguard. The best soldiers were Joab's brother Asahel, Elhanah, son of Dodo of Bethlehem, Shamoth the Hararite, Helez the Pelonite, Ira, son of Ikesh the Tekoite, Abiezer the Anathothite, Sibbecai the Hushathite, Eli the Ahoite, Maharai the Netophalite, Heled, son of Baana the Netophalite, Ethai, son of Ribai from Gibeah of the Benjaminites, Benaiah the Parathonite, Horai from the wadis of Gaash, Abiel the Arbathite, Asmaveth the Bahuramite, Eliabah the Shaalbanite, the sons of Hashim the Gizonite, Jonathan son of Shagi the Hararite, Ahiam son of Sakar the Hararite, Eliphal son of Hefer the Mecherathite, Ahijah the Pelonite, Hezro the Carmelite, Naarai son of Isbai, Joel the brother of Nathan, Mibhar son of Hagri, Zelek the Ammonite, Naharai the Beerothites, the armor bearer of Joab, son of Zeruiah, Zariah, Era, the Ethrites, Gareb, the Ethrite, Uriah, the Hethite, Zabab, son of Alai, Adina, son of Shiza, the Reubenite, chief of the Reubenites, and 30 with him, Hanan, son of Maacah, Joshaphat, the Mithnites, Uzziah, the Asherathite, Shammah, the Jeiel, Shammah and Jeiel, sons of Hotham, the Arorite, Jediael, son of Shimri, and his brother Joah, the Tizrite, Eliel, the Mahavite, Jeribai, and Joshaviah, the sons of El-Naam, Ithma, the Moabites, Eliel, Obed, and Jaasiel, the Mesobite. And that is the reading of First Chronicles, chapters 10 and 11, which again talks about Saul, the transition to David, and then lists the many mighty men of David. So again, once we get here, chapter 10, we move past the genealogies of chapters 1 through 9. We get here to chapter 10, and we're focusing on how God is continuing his rule of his people, but now he's going to do it through the means of earthly kings. They are to be his representation of the people. They are to be those who administer justice and righteousness. They should be those who were the most committed to the law. Remember, it was a stipulation within the law that the kings were to have a copy of the law itself and were to be those who are intimately familiar with God's law so as to be able to obey it themselves and then lead the people in obedience to the law as well. But once we come into this narrative section that starts focusing on the kings, we basically skip 1 Samuel chapter 8 all the way through 2 Samuel chapter 1. There's nothing mentioned about how Saul was anointed and the search for him as king and all of his rule. All we see is the very end, where the Philistines are fighting against Israel and Saul and his sons are cut down. That's all we see here within the text. All we see is the ability for the Philistines to have a victory over the house of Saul and to use it as a way to denigrate Israel and to disrespect the God of Israel by showing, hey, look, we have Yahweh's king here of his people. We have his head, we have his armor, and now we're going to put all that in the temple of Dagon, their god. But we also read about the men of Jabesh Gilead who went and recovered Saul and his sons, and they're buried there in Jabesh under the oak. So we have that at least going for us. But then we're told, I have a really hard time believing there's anyone who had been reading the Chronicles as we have them here and as they would have been receiving the post-exile. I have a hard time believing any of them would not know the history of Saul and would not know the fuller story of Saul and his reign. So maybe that would be so much of just a shock to them. So more so then, this is not just a retelling of history for the retelling of history's sake. It's not just to inform intellectually, but it is for a theological purpose to let them know, this is where they were and this is what happened. But here's the theological reason behind why this happened. Verse number 13, that Saul was unfaithful to Yahweh. He did not keep Yahweh's word. He did not inquire of Yahweh, but instead he consulted with a medium for spiritual guidance. So for all this, for this unfaithfulness, for this covenant unfaithfulness, for his unfaithfulness as the king of his people, Yahweh had him put to death, and the kingship is then transferred to David. So then in chapters 11 and 12, we're going to see the gradual growth of David's kingship over Israel. We'll see that in some parts here in 11, and then more so in chapter 12 tomorrow that we're going to read about. We'll see that tomorrow. But it begins with the people coming to David and saying, hey, listen, even while Saul was king, we recognize that you were the one leading us. You were leading us. So now we want to make sure that we are in line with Yahweh's will that he has spoken through Samuel, and we want to make sure that you become king. So that's what they do. They end up all coming together, the elders of the people of David. They enter into covenant together in Yahweh's presence, and they anoint David as king over Israel. So what does David do next? It says, well, it starts with him capturing his city. It's important to remember that Jerusalem was not always Jerusalem. It used to be this place called Jebus, and Jebus belonged to the Jebusites. So David had to take over this place, and it's so funny to read about them, because remember, Jerusalem was in a fantastic strategic position up in the hills, surrounded. It was difficult to get to. So they're basically, you can imagine them looking down out the window and seeing David and his men down there and saying, "Hey, David, good to see you. You'll never get in here." It's almost like they turn around and boom, there's David. He got in there, and certainly he did this. Notice why, though. Notice why David was able to have the success. It's at the end of verse number 9, where it says Yahweh of armies was with him. That's the difference between David and Saul. Yahweh was with David because David was a faithful man. Yahweh was not with Saul because Saul was not a faithful man. And you might remember me talking about that as we read through Saul's story, and how there could be a pretty decent argument made that Saul never was really a faithful follower of Yahweh, and that he was really a result of the people getting the type of king that they needed, instead of allowing God to work out in his timing to give them the, he was the king that they deserved, because they would not allow God to work out in his timing to give them the king that they needed. The king they deserved was Saul. The king they needed was David. So finally, here is Yahweh now working out on his time to give them a leader who was a man after his own heart. So then we begin in verse number 10, just talking about the exploits of David's men. We have all these people listed here, and many of the incredible victories that they achieved in fighting against the enemies of Yahweh, many of them being against Philistines. And then there's the one man, Benaiah, who fought against sons of the king of Moab, and also against a 7.5 foot tall Egyptian. There is this mentioning here, this funny story where David, he's like, "Oh man, I remember just how good that water was from the well and at the city gate of Bethlehem. Oh man, I sure wish I can have some of that right now." And then these men breaking through the Philistine camp in order to go and get that water and bring it to David. That just shows the type of commitment that people had to David. That shows the type of leadership that he was, the type of leader that he was, and the type of leadership that he possessed, that he would just kind of make in passing this comment about this incredible water, and they would risk their lives to go get it. Now, David, of course, he says, "I can't drink this. You risk your life for it. I'm going to offer it to God instead. He's the only one who deserves such loyalty as this." But again, just shows the type of people that we're dealing with here, the type of soldiers that David surrounded himself with. And really, again, so much of it to me gets back to leadership. And why was David a good leader? Well, David was a good leader because of the character that he possessed. The type of character that he possessed was one who served Yahweh. Because he served Yahweh, God was with him, and he had great success. And we're going to see as we read tomorrow, going through chapter 12, we'll read tomorrow about some of the more success that he had in expanding his reign over the lands. If you have any questions about this text here in 1 Chronicles chapters 10 or 11, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I know a lot of this is stuff that we have already covered. We're not going to read everything that was mentioned in 1st and 2nd Kings, which again, 1st and 2nd Kings, I think, was more concerned with giving a lot, just more of the history of Israel. Here, it's history again, yes, but it's history for a very specific theological purpose, trying to show them again who they are, where they belong, what happened, and then to teach this is what you need to do in order to remain in this land and to be the type of people that God expects you to be. Again, if you have any questions or comments about this text, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below. And I hope I'll see you again tomorrow as we read through 1 Chronicles chapter 12. Have a great rest of your Friday, everyone. Take care, and God bless.